All right, welcome to our podcast, 2 O'Clock Coffee, where we talk theology and cultural issues. And we're back here for episode number 2, responding to the show, the documentary. Is it Happy Shiny People or Shiny Happy People?
I think it's Shiny Happy People.
I think it's shiny.
Isn't that an
What have I
REM
been
song?
saying?
Happy shiny people.
Well, hang on a second.
Shiny happy
people sounds
people.
easier for me to say.
Does it?
Shiny Happy People.
But for the happy,
Yeah.
shiny happy.
Okay,
happy
I
people.
literally hear that REM song. Shiny, happy people.
I
Okay,
have no, I don't know that song.
So anyway,
I don't know that song.
Okay, hey, but I have a bunch of questions, that
great.
have been
Nice, yeah.
that I've written down and some that people have given me to ask you guys. And but before we jump into there, between our last podcast and this one, has anything happened in your life personally that you'd like to share with everybody? Let's start, Jenny.
Oh my gosh. I love this. I have 2 middle schoolers now.
yeah.
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 Yeah. So my daughter's now in middle school,
Nice.
and that is wild. I don't know. Things are fun.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Sure.
I can't remember if there's anything else I should have in my life that I should be talking about, but if you can think of anything, let me know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
Ju-
taking up a lot of time.
What about you, Justin?
Oh, I mean, all kinds of stuff. But actually, one of the things I loved is my wife Hannah and I celebrated 27 years.
Hey.
Hey.
And also,
Congrats.
yeah, it's good. And then did our annual pilgrimage to Montana, where we spent some days in the woods and hiking with our kids and our oldest son's girlfriend, and just good stuff, man. So yeah.
Hey, one thing that I noticed, you call your wife's name is Hannah, but I noticed whenever we're talking, sometimes you say H.
I do.
You should call her
Is that?
H.
I do.
I don't know why, but it makes me think James Bond. Does she have some kind of a role with the British government?
She has all kinds of superpowers, of which I cannot speak.
What does
So-
she do, though? Tell everybody what she does.
Oh, she is gifted in so many ways, but her work right now, she's working with a great organization, Atlas Free, working against human trafficking and just doing all kinds of tremendous work with that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And Ken, anything between the last podcast and this one that you want, just personal stuff going on?
Yeah, empty nesting.
Come
Yeah,
on.
Kim and I will be celebrating 25 years of marriage this December. Have a trip planned to Hawaii, and just her and I. And so I'm getting to the position where I'm dating her again. And we'll just go off into the sunset together. With
Okay.
Deep love.
Happy shiny people.
Happy shiny people.
What on your hat? It says Azusa Pacific University Dad.
Dad, absolutely.
Which one of your kids is that?
Kalia is at Azusa Pacific University. She's been there about 3 weeks now. Communication management major. She's doing well, getting settled in, understanding the rigor of a college education.
Yeah.
And so, it's just we're proud of all of our daughters just trying to live out their dream. And we want to support that. And our philosophy is round 1 is on us. Anything after that is on you and Jesus. And so we just want to make sure they get a nice little push off the dock. Absolutely. Yeah, it's the fun stuff.
Cool. Good.
Yeah.
Good. No, thank you for asking. What's happened with me?
What
I
about
was
you? I was
literally
just
about to
about to
ask.
ask that,
I just
man.
was waiting for the moment. But Wes, how about you?
Oh gosh, I haven't even thought about this question. Well, I mean, we're into the empty nest, and so Clara went back to Seattle University
Go
for
Redhawks,
her senior year.
Already, that's insane.
Okay, but tell everybody what she's studying, because she's so cool.
Well, she's studying criminal justice.
Yeah.
So she's practiced on our family, so we want her to practice on others. And she doesn't know. She might go the route of like an FBI type of role. The other role would be is to go back to law school.
Yeah, she's thinking about the law school.
And that I need that language. That's on you and Jesus, right?
I like that.
Yeah. So, but no, she's looking at law school, and her grandpa, Carrie's dad, is an attorney.
Nice.
So that would be kind of a cool thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, and also since the last time, glad you asked that, Justin. I became a grandpa again.
Hey.
Yeah.
Nice.
Third grandkid.
Congratulations.
So
That's awesome.
yeah, Austin and Olivia had a baby boy just over a week ago, Henry, 2 weeks. And so that's been really fun to watch. It's crazy because you guys haven't experienced this yet.
No.
Watching your kids love their kids is one of the greatest rewards in life.
Wow. Okay.
So
All right. Good
yeah.
deal.
So let's go ahead and jump into this. We all set out to watch. I think there's 4 episodes
Yes.
of Shiny Happy People.
Yes.
And did you guys watch them all at once? Did you binge it? Did you kind of do it a little bit over time? How'd you get through it?
I binged it. Confession moment. Yeah, I binged it.
You binged it.
I also binged it, but like 3 weeks ago.
Oh.
I see.
So
Gotcha.
I did like I was
Yeah.
traveling, and I was like,
Sure.
well, I'll just watch it when I'm in the, hotel.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I probably thought I was going to binge it, and then I watched part of the first one. I'm like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Just
I
too
broke it
emotional?
up. We'll
It was
talk
heavy.
more about
It
it.
took me 3 times to get through it.
It's heavy.
And
Yeah.
yeah. I wasn't like, man, I want to watch more
No,
of this.
it was not on the top of my list.
We're
Yeah.
gonna take a break.
Do we need a genre break?
Yeah, we do. Probably.
You know what we could use is some suggestions of things for us to
that'd be
talk
fun.
about. So
That'd
if
be
people
nice.
have
That'd be fun.
ideas, they should tell us.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay, so all right, so Shiny Happy People follows the family, the Duggards.
Yeah.
And they, I think, had a reality show.
Yes.
19 kids in counting.
19
Yes.
and counting.
19 and counting. Okay, and then it also dives a little bit into a organization that they were a part of that does training on biblical principles for living. Does that sound right?
Yeah, the IBLP,
IBLP.
IBLP.
Institute of
Biblical
Life Principles.
Principles. Okay. And so one of the questions I had in the very beginning, it's pretty broad brush, is this. One of the titles for Shiny Happy People, it said a cult documentary. So my question is, are churches cults? And if not, how are they different?
It's a great question.
Great question. I'm going to say no, they're not. And just my gut reaction, I'm going to say no, they're not. And I think they're different because the arrows aren't pointing inward. The church's arrows are to point outward. And I just think having that outward focus and in the community to help life transformation, I think is a big distinction between the church and a cult. You know?
I appreciate the aspirational nature of that answer because I'm with you, right?
Sure.
We've
Yeah,
walked
yeah.
down this path.
Yeah.
When you asked the question, though, I said, well, it could be.
Yeah.
Because what Ken says is a beautiful vision of the church, right? A collective of people following Jesus, which I know you well enough, that would include taking that way where it's a humble journey, right? Walking with
absolutely.
people for the good of the world.
Uh-huh.
But we all know other stories where it was more cult-like, controlling leadership, power, structures, right? That looked more like to use some of the biblical language, more like the dragon than the lamb.
Yes, sir.
So could it be either? It could.
What do you think, Jenny?
I think it probably has to do with what the group of, so a cult would be a group of people who are kind of have whatever it is that they're rallying around. I think it has to do with what are you rallying around,
Yeah.
and then what are you rallying toward.
Right.
So if the idea is we're becoming an in-group, which this is a human thing, humans form in-groups. It's
Right.
just a normal thing that we do. If your in-group is then surrounded around some person of power who isn't Jesus, then I think what ends up happening is
Yeah.
the propulsion of that in-group will only have negative fruit, not
Right.
life-lasting fruit.
Okay. I noticed the Duggards. So I think I don't know that I'm a target audience for reality TV shows because like I'm
List them. How many have you watched?
well, my kids will tell you. So I've never seen one. I mean, I've seen like maybe 5 minutes of like The Bachelor or something like that. I'm just, if there's not like a scoreboard and a
Yeah.
ball, I just probably am not watching.
Yeah, like Second Chance You. I think that was okay, right?
That's not bad.
Oh, is that count as that's reality?
that's
Wait,
reality.
Oh, I
what's-
watched that.
what's
I
the
watched
one?
that.
But
Yeah.
I'm with you on the
Yeah.
other.
Hard Knocks, like when they're that's reality.
That's
I
reality.
haven't seen Hard Knocks.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. There's
But
a
Second Chance
distinction.
You, yeah.
Yeah.
Watch that.
Okay, so I have seen some.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sports reality.
Sports.
That's what you've
Sports
watched.
reality. Not love
It's
after
human
lockup.
story.
Yeah.
It's human story.
So like when they mentioned the Duggards in
Yeah.
19 and counting, so I had to look it up, like what it is. So then I found out, these are babies, these are kids.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the questions I asked is it a biblical mandate to have as many babies as possible? And like how many kids is too many kids?
That's a great question.
So their kind of philosophy comes from the scripture that says, "Blessed is the children are
Quiver.
like arrows.
Yeah.
Blessed are the one who had the quiver full of them." Right?
Quiver.
That's the
Yeah.
idea. Quiver.
I don't
Quiver.
quiver.
Quiverful.
It's hard to say, isn't it? A
Quiverful.
little bit without smiling.
Quiverful.
Quiver.
Quiverful.
Yeah.
I can hold a straight face. Yeah. Quiverful.
Well, and I might also bring up that and I actually did follow the 19 Kids and Counting story.
Did you really?
I sure did. Well, I was having babies at that time.
Oh.
So there's nothing else to do but like watch morning talk shows and the Duggars. So that's kind of what I did.
Really?
I watched all of it. So I remember watching Jim Bob and Michelle. They like their testimony is largely centered around the fact that, and this is where there's a little bit of empathy, is that
Yeah.
Michelle had been pregnant, they were using birth control, and then she had a miscarriage, which she and Jim Bob interpreted as a sign from the Lord that they shouldn't be using birth control.
Okay.
So that's like kind of where the 19 Kids and Counting story comes from. Like that's the testimony that they share is so then therefore we stopped using birth control because that was a sin is kind of what they came to.
Yeah, and I heard them say, like, the question was, like, people say, like, how many children's too many? And they said, like, how many blessings are too many blessings?
Yeah.
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 I don't know, what somebody else, like, how would you respond to
it's
that?
It's such a good question and a big question. I guess even my pause to answer is, I think the trouble is trying to answer a question like that once and for all for everyone. So do we have these invitations? I mean, you go back to the earliest part of the scriptural story, right? To fill the earth, right? The quiver full. I'm a dad. I have 4 kids. They are deep blessings to my life. As a 20-year-old, I never would have thought I'd be in the place I am now, but I would not change my life in any way. Like I wouldn't want to do it differently, even though I didn't see it coming. Here's my point, though. But I also walk with others, whether it's season of life, whether it's their own journey, whether it's their own challenges, whether it's what their bodies can handle, whether it's, you could just keep going. That to try to impose that answer for everyone, I don't think lines up with also in the realm of the scriptural story of how we actually love one another, how we embody the way of Jesus. And I would even go specifically there. And some would say maybe I'm arguing from silence, but we don't see Jesus saying things in that definitive way. And we see him walking with a lot of different kinds of people, and he never seems to correct that issue or change that issue or
Discuss that issue.
discuss that issue.
Ever.
So I just think, again, his embodiment way to walk with people in their individual state, I think has to play into that question. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And I think as a father of daughters, I have 3 daughters, and you guys know my story. You know, Kim and I, we lost our first child. Little Kenny is his name, 3 months old, born with a condition. And so I come from it from that lens to think with my own family, I wouldn't want my own daughters to feel like if I don't have children, then I'm missing some sort of blessing from God. And so I want them to feel like whatever God's will is, plan is for their life, they can have that fruitful life. And if that doesn't include, you know, having children, then I don't want them to feel like they be missing something.
There's a spiritualization of the idea of being a mother or being a father in the way that kind of this was presented that would create a class system for those who are unable to have children.
Yes.
And so as a woman who has a lot of friends who have had infertility, who have gone through miscarriages, who've lost children, I watch that and I'm like, you have now told, I can list 10 friends that they are less holy because their bodies are not able to do what your body is able to do. And even in watching 19 Kids and Counting, there were multiple times toward the end of, you know, you get up in the upper teens of numbers of pregnancies that Michelle was very sick. And it just starts to ask the question of what actually is God's will for family. And I think that that's something that is a conviction, not, it's not a biblical mandate because there isn't one. There's not one that says how many is too many.
Well, what about be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth? That's a biblical mandate.
Yeah, but that's a collective mandate to the whole of humanity,
And,
not to
and
one
couldn't you say,
family.
well, isn't the world pretty full?
Well, I heard on the show, though, that everybody could fit, like, in one state, was it? This,
One corner of Florida or something like that.
it was,
There-
I can't
there's
remember the
some-
state.
there's
You
some-
probably remember the state.
There's some stuff. I
But
don't
that
know.
is-
Yeah, there's a
Arkansas?
rabbit hole there. But even even to that, if you take it further than even the children, and maybe we're going here, but even the notion that you would have to be married, for instance, to be this maybe
It just, it does
exemplar of
create,
humanity in God's will. Well, then Jesus wouldn't have made the cut. Paul wouldn't have made the cut. I'm
Yeah.
just saying, like,
Mother Teresa.
so some of the things presented with children and family, they become something else. Yeah.
And I think that we see a lot of language in the scriptures that point to generational leadership, passing on spiritual mantles, spiritual children. Paul even says, "You're my son in the faith." There's, I wonder if, like most things, when God is talking about the way we're to be in the world, he's not just talking about the physical world. And so when we think about be fruitful and multiply, and then we also think about a quiver full of blessings, then we also think about how the older women are to be with younger women, the older men are to be with younger men. How do we pass on the faith? I wonder if it's more in the story of God about how we're inviting people into the greater family of God,
Well, isn't
not our
that
personal
Jesus's-
family.
Isn't that the beautiful vision of Jesus?
Yeah.
You know, who are my mother, brothers, right? You remember that?
Yeah.
And he just paints this big family picture. And then later, isn't it Paul in Ephesians that talks about, and he's using two groups to exemplify, but he talks about in Christ's resurrection, there's now a whole new humanity.
Yeah.
And we are in it together. That's what
Maybe
you're
the
talking
multiplication is actually evangelistic. Like, how are we gaining more people to know who Jesus is?
Yeah. Plant those seeds of love. Let the love multiply.
I'm just, I mean, just like flat out, I'm really leery of anybody who says something is a biblical mandate that Jesus never talked about.
How many kids do you have?
2.
When you watch that, do you feel like that you should have had more kids?
No. Not one time. No, I come from a family of 5 kids. And this, I mean, just really, I watched my parents struggle financially my entire life. And so we ate at the food bank, and there were times that we couldn't have clothes, and there were things that we didn't have. And I wonder how much of that was either pressure that my parents felt, or maybe they really did feel called to have these kids. And, you know, I actually am not them, so I can't make that call. But I did make a choice when I was younger that I did not want to have a lot of kids because I wanted my kids' experience to be different than mine.
So Carrie, it's interesting. I just assumed a lot of things. So you get married, and I'm like, I know we're probably going to have a lot of kids, and we didn't really talk about it, right?
Yeah.
And then Carrie says, "Look, I got a degree teaching. I want to not have kids for 5 years." And I was like, "Wow, like this is stuff that would have been nice to know up front." Right? But it was interesting. About 3 years into the marriage, we were driving home from a church gathering, and we were on I-90. It would be not far from where you spent a lot of time. And she says, "Pull over." Like on the highway, I pulled over on the highway, and she starts crying, and she's like, "I want to have kids."
Wow.
So I was like, "Let's go home."
Let's go
And
home.
so that's why I said. Honestly, that's why I said, "Let's go home."
Kenny Smith, let's go home.
And so, we ended up having over time 2 children, and her pregnancies were in a lot of ways dangerous to her body.
Yeah, high risk.
So she said, "I'm done."
Okay.
And I said, "Can you be for sure before I do anything that I would just like to know that you really know this is for sure." And I remember it was a few years later she came back because Claire is 8 years younger than Kaylee, and she said, "I think we're supposed to have one more." And of course, Claire was born early, preemie, University of Washington Medical Center. I mean, I just want to appreciate that. As a man, I don't understand all that Carrie went through to have our children.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
I also think I wouldn't want us to move past this topic without saying that if somebody does have a conviction that they don't want to use birth control, that they want to do some natural planning or trust God in that way, I don't think that that's mandated against in Scripture.
No,
sure. Yeah.
So I think it's on both ends. I think it's a personal conviction that people make with themselves and the Lord and their spouse, and I don't think that we see any instruction that could limit that.
Let's switch gears here. I noticed on the show, I think her name's Jill Gothard, Jill and Derek. I think those two are featured quite a bit as there's been now some conflict with the family. Okay. And so it went into their story, and one of the things that came out is that Derek, I think they used the term courted Jill.
Yeah.
Courtship is something that's taught, so they don't date, they court. Question, should the church give leadership to how people date, and is courting actually the biblical model for dating? What did you guys do?
Not that.
Yeah. I'll see you the next episode.
Didn't you?
Did you date? Did you date in high
I
school?
did date.
Middle school?
I dated, and it, and this is my daughters certainly don't like this answer, but when I met Kim is when I actually started to find somebody I could date. Because there was just this other stuff. I don't know what I was doing. You can just call it puppy love, playing around. I don't know. But when I met Kim, I'm like, all right, this is how I show respect, I show honor, and all these things that start to come out that I learned and grown over the last 25 years. And so for me, having 3 daughters that are very beautiful young ladies, and there's a lot of men young men that try to lobby their attention, I've had to learn, what is dating? What does the dating mean? And does that mean that public display of affection, hold hands, go to movies, just go out? So I think, one way that the church probably could help parents is to just give them some ways to say, all right, get clear on what do some of these terms mean. Yeah. And then what are maybe some boundaries that you can, have with your children so they understand, how to keep themselves safe. And then explore kind of some of the things that they are feeling as they want to, have love and connection. And that's what I've learned about boundaries. I think the church really can help with boundaries, because when I go back to the garden and God said, don't eat of this tree, I always think, stay away, stay away, stay away, stay away. And so with my own children, I'm like, you need to stay away, stay away. And then God showed me that boundary wasn't for them to actually just stay away from the tree, but the boundary was there so they can see what they had access to.
Because there was other trees.
There was other trees, way more. And so I think if we can provide leadership and just say, hey, okay, here's why these boundaries are in place, so you know what you have access to instead of what you should stay away from, it would help me as a parent. Okay. Yeah.
What did you do, Jenny?
I dated. So
Yeah.
I dated. And I think my first boyfriend was when I was like, I don't know, 11, 12. I actually dated this boy named Logan 13 times. We broke up and got back together again. Every time we broke up, I would stop wearing this angel pin that he gave me, and then when we got back together, I'd put it on so that people would know we're back together. It's okay, guys. It was honestly a really important relationship. No, I actually dated a lot of different people, and most of my relationships were pretty short, kind of like you said, like 3 months was the longest I ever dated anybody, until Richard, who is now my husband, and I started dating my junior year of high school. And then that never ended.
Hey, come on.
So, but I'm also the only real girlfriend Richard's ever had. So we're coming from 2 very different places. There was a camp girlfriend that he had that they said
you can't.
He had a camp girlfriend.
Cupcaking doesn't count.
And I'm coming from this other place. And so when we got together, it was interesting. I actually didn't even know we were dating when we started dating because it was so different. Yeah, like he just starts like taking me places nicely, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to go here with my friends?" And I'm like, "That sounds great." And then one day he's like, "Hey," I'm like, "Do you like me?" And he's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Do you want to date me?" And he's like, "I thought that's what this was." And then everything changed for me. But yeah, I think that the idea of dating, I grew up, there was a book that came out when I was in middle school, and it was called I Kissed Dating Goodbye.
Josh Harris, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Anybody read
I
that
think
book?
I handed
I think
it
I got
out.
the other book that just said I kissed.
I kissed it.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you what, for me, being a young woman reading that book, I remember reading it thinking, well, I guess I can't be a Christian.
Oh, wow.
Because it was so very clear that this is a godly way of dating, and it was the model of courtship, and that there's very, very little connection or contact, and it's all going to be chaperoned, and you're maybe not even going to kiss somebody until your wedding day. And having read it, I had already made many mistakes that would lead me away from being inside of whatever that category was. And so I was at the point where I was like, well, I am now disqualified. So dating was a really complicated thing for me, growing up in a youth group that was in kind of that I Kissed Dating Goodbye era. So it's been an interesting thing for me.
I noticed this with me is I didn't know what courtship was because it was not talked about. I'm old enough that my era didn't hear it.
Yeah.
But when I became a youth pastor, it became very popular. And I think I probably swung to a season where I'm like, I think this could be what I need to teach. So I think I bought some of the books and handed them out. There's probably people out there right now that are like really wishing that they had a different youth pastor. So, but But some of it was some of the remorse that I had for my own life.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there were things that happened to me, but then there were things that I did to others that I would call like I sinned against them.
Okay.
And so that's like, oh,
Yeah.
you know, like that, when you sin against somebody in that way, it's like, you know, and then, you know, I would say, well, but I didn't do X as a way of like, do you see, I'm actually a pretty good guy.
Right.
Right. But that's not
Yeah.
helpful
Trying to
or
minimize it,
hopeful
yeah.
for the person that was hurt.
Yeah.
So I had a little season where I actually brought in a speaker, and they actually taught courtship to our whole community and lifted it up. And I can remember there's an illustration at the end where they take a rose, and everyone you date, you give your heart to like a petal. And then you keep doing it. At the end of it, it's like there's nothing left. And they're like, this is what you're going to hand the person you're going to marry.
Okay.
And the shame of the room, well, hang on. The shame of the room, like you look around and there's like people crying because they're like, I have no petals on my rose. And we're just like,
Yeah.
see, like, so stop doing your stupid stuff.
Yeah. Wow,
But I
jeez.
think one of the things that happened though is you get missed in all this is the gospel.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no good news. There's, you know, like where is Jesus in all of this? And how do you learn how to have actually appropriate relationships?
Right.
Yeah.
And so with my own kids, one of the things I noticed is not using the courtship model, but actually just, you know, the things that work the best is when my kids dated people that interacted with everybody in our family.
Yeah.
I love that.
That's good.
That illustration that you talked about with the rose, it's really interesting because I probably saw all those when I was I was just like prime era of that type of an illustration. And I remember there was a pastor who once was telling that story of seeing a speaker, maybe the same one,
Wow.
do that illustration.
Maybe me.
And they
Might have
had
been you.
brought,
Maybe me.
and
It was
that
probably
this
Wes.
pastor had brought a friend
Yeah.
who had a colorful past
Okay.
to sit with him.
Yeah.
And as the speaker was saying it, he's just more and more horrified as this
Yeah.
thing is going
Sure.
on.
Wow.
And what he said actually changed a lot for me personally was he picked up a rose and when he was telling the story and it had nothing on it. And he's like, all I wanted to do in that moment is get up on that stage and scream at the top of my lungs, Jesus wants the rose.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jesus wants the rose.
Come on.
And I think there is a healthy drive for spiritual leaders, parents to want to protect our kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that people who were in my life at that time, they were trying to protect me. And I didn't listen to a lot of it, which did lead to a lot of pain in my life.
Yeah.
But that pendulum can swing so far to protection to where then we actually aren't telling anybody the why. We're not teaching them what actually is this thing that God's invited you into. What's the good thing? When you talk about like all the good that there is out there,
Yeah.
I think that's the type of imagination that our kids need is a beautiful picture.
That's good.
Yeah.
A beautiful picture that will invite them into something that they want in their life.
Yeah.
I had a whole lot of lists of don'ts,
Right.
and everything about my nature led me to say, but like I want those things.
Yeah.
So then when no one gave me a better thing to want, I was just stuck, honestly, feeling a little bit listless. Like, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
And so as a confused teenager, I was just like, well, I'm just going to go with whatever feels right to me because I didn't have a better future or a preferred vision to look to.
Yeah.
I appreciate that because even as you were talking, and I think it gets to that original question, what you're basically saying is there is a need. Matter of fact, we're created to walk with one another, and I would say, and do the nurturing work that actually leans into that imagination of goodness, that
Yeah.
leans into the flourishing life, that then can actually address all the kinds of things. You know, the broken stuff like that I walked through as a young man and into my early adulthood, like to have someone to walk with me through that, right? Now I get to walk with my boys through it, not towards shame or the thing, but towards the actual reality of what it would look like to be whole. And then to actually treat another person with wholeness, like that nurturing that I hear you talking about, like that is what we're invited to do, right?
Yeah.
One of the things I noticed was
good.
is the one is so having a lot of babies was held up as a high value. Courtship was held up as a high value. Another thing that was held up as a high value was homeschool. And in fact, I think there was a curriculum base that was then used
Yeah.
for the homeschool.
ATI or something.
The
I think
ATI,
it's
yeah.
Right.
So is homeschool a good thing for Christian families, or is it bad for the church?
It's a false dichotomy right there.
Yeah, you're setting us
It's a
up.
false dichotomy. Okay, side
Good.
note. As we were talking about this, I was telling some friends, we're going to film this
Yeah.
podcast, and we're talking about this thing. And I found out that like 4 of my coworkers were raised in this homeschool environment, the ATI.
Oh, so they
Like
actually,
they did the wisdom books, they went to
yeah,
the went to
sure.
the conferences, they did the things, and it was really interesting because most of them, I'm like, so what was that like? Making a massive assumption that they're like, I hated it. They were like, I loved it.
so they liked it?
They loved it because it was like it was designed to make them feel like they were part of something, and they got it's like Boy Scouts, like they
Sure.
got sashes and badges and all the things.
Did they get like a little angel?
a little angel pin that they could wear when they were dating Logan? Anyway, but yeah, it was just interesting to me that so many were, and my parents homeschooled my older siblings, and then I went to private school until I was in 6th grade, and then I went to public school for the rest of my schooling. So
Gotcha.
I've kind of had the gamut. I don't know
Sure.
what you guys have. As
No,
far as
yeah,
your experience.
I know, and certainly, to the original question, I have a lot of great friends, parents who have elected to homeschool their children,
Yeah.
and it's certainly, again, what is God's will for your family, what you feel is best. I think that's certainly, that the priority. A parent has, certainly that the power to make that decision on how
Yeah.
to educate their children. I'm an only child, and so so if having babies is the bar, then my mom missed that one because she's I'm gonna have one, and if it's a boy, I'm done. And so I'm an only child, and so for me, I was public school system my whole life, latchkey kid. Mom and dad got divorced, so sports was one way that I was able to engage in school and things of that nature. But yeah, as I've looked at some of my friends, it's interesting sometimes the perception of homeschool versus not homeschool.
Yeah.
That we can always be like one's more holier than the other or
Yeah.
not, or one's more restrictive than the other. And I just think, let's elevate the conversation and say, what's the best decision for this family, and then, come alongside that nurturing. Yeah.
I appreciate that again, and we keep coming to that thread that actually in Jesus' church, there's actually space for and even the celebration of a beautiful diversity.
Yeah.
In every way. So I think there's that. I think practically though, I do think it's wise to ask questions around these things. Am I equipped to actually homeschool my kids? Like literally one of the things when I watched the documentary that even on the homeschool kind of approach is, if we're honest, it lacked. The curriculum lacked. It aimed a certain direction, but it didn't bring a robust vision of maybe the rest of the learning journey that if you even look through Christian history, Jesus followers for ages have celebrated being great learners.
Right.
Being people who understood the sciences, who understood the way the world works, who leaned into it, not separating ourselves from it. And so one of the questions I always ask is, are we equipped to do a good job? And if I'm not, then who could I partner with to do that work?
Right.
Right? And so, I mean, that's, when you ask the question, that's where I go. I'm into the diversity. We get to make the best choices for our family, and we're all doing the best we can.
Yeah.
So let's have a little grace for each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the same time, there's things I'm going to be equipped to do, and there's other things that I'm not.
Yeah.
And I think asking real questions about it, working together in community to address those things is important.
I think it's interesting that there's a lot of questions that we ask about our life and the
Yeah.
way that life should be done. And frustratingly, the Bible doesn't have a lot to say about a lot of the questions that we ask about our modern world.
But I find that not frustrating.
I agree. I think it's frustrating
Lean
for
into that
those
mystery.
who are saying, I would like there to be a system that I can lay
Like a
out
template?
that would
Yeah.
be a template for life. This is what it looks like. Basic instructions before leaving Earth. You've heard this
Yeah.
idea. And I think that that's something that people have inside of us that we want. Have you heard that acronym before?
No,
For
but
the Bible?
I can't. I
You
think
like it now?
I might use this Sunday.
That's great.
BIBLE.
The idea, I mean, that's what I was taught as a kid. And then as I got older and older, there was a promise out there that this is in the Bible. And I can imagine as people like Jill Duggar and those people they're like, it's not. And because it isn't in there, it's like, so actually then what does it mean to live a life of faith? What does it mean to follow Jesus?
Yeah.
And I think that God, in his infinite wisdom, in the way that he inspired the scriptures, did that on purpose, that
Well,
we would
that's-
need each other, that we would need conversation, that we would
Yes.
have to ask questions of what does it actually look like? It can't be put in a book.
Yeah.
That's not.
You got something you want to say,
Well,
don't
just
you?
and succinctly on that, I know all of us have talked about this before. Like we, for instance, appreciate the good work of like N.T. Wright, right? N.T. Wright.
Right.
Anyway,
Right.
You know
Bless
how
him.
he talks
Right.
about this whole notion of the narrative of Scripture.
Yeah.
And I don't remember when it was, years ago, read that little essay he put out where he says, like, imagine you're a group of folks who love Shakespearean work. And so you immerse yourself in Shakespeare and you come to the point you want to perform this newly discovered work of Shakespeare, but you only have the 4 acts, right? You don't have the 5th act. But you so immerse yourself in the 4 acts that by the time you get to the part where the curtain's up and you're performing on the stage, you actually know what to do in the 5th act, even though it's not prescribed for you. Because you are so in congruence with the first 4 that now you get to live freely into it. And that's what
That's
you're talking
good.
about.
Yep.
We read the scriptures, right? And we let them form us as we follow Jesus, the living word.
Yeah.
And now we get to live our lives not on a template, but as free, loved beings who get to actually live this out in the world. That's
Yeah.
the vision you're
That's
talking about.
Yeah, that's the fruit. Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
fruit that gets bared.
Okay, do you guys want? I want to jump into some more tension.
For sure.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. Bill Gothard is somebody who is introduced in this as the head of this organization that's doing the teaching on the Institute of Basic Life Principles.
Yeah.
Okay. So Bill Gothard wasn't married, didn't have kids, and built a ministry on how to marry and raise a family. Is that
Red
wrong?
flag. Isn't that a red flag?
I think it's an interesting. Yes. So I would say immediately it gave me pause because my question, and this is the cynic in me. My question is, who is benefiting from this? Like, who is
Yeah.
profiting from this? What is actually what is he trying to accomplish? And if it's like you're set yourself up as the one person who has the answer for all these things, and you're making a ton of money in it, that
Well,
always gives me some.
That's
pause.
a big part of the conversation.
Sure.
I'm assuming we're going to lean into too, the power and
Yeah.
and the benefit piece. But even the original question though, like, so you want to start a business, and I've never started the business, but I'm going to come tell you how to do all the parts and prop myself up as an expert. I would just say, I would question that.
Can I push back on you two?
Yeah.
I can think of another person who wasn't married, didn't have kids, and also taught on how to marry and raise a family. Jesus.
Fully God. And fully human, but let's go to the fully God part. The only one who's fully God. So I'm not in that camp. Bill wasn't in that camp. I'm just saying.
I love that. Okay, here's a thought. Now, wait, actually, I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Would you ever, I'm going to ask 2. 1, would
Sure.
you ever preach a sermon on something that you don't have some sort of firsthand experience on? And
Yes.
yes or no?
Oh, I'm sorry. Ken.
No, can I answer it in this way? If I did preach, it wouldn't be authentic.
Okay.
So I'd be going through the motions, and God convicts me every time I find myself in that space.
I guess what I'm wondering is, because there might be things that
Are you
we're asked
leading
to
the witness?
speak about.
I sense it.
I feel like you're leading the witness.
Yes. There might be something that I feel like God wants me to speak about, and the way then that you approach it would be different. So it might be that you're like, God gave you something to say, and you're like, I've not experienced this, but I know the Holy Spirit has
can
given
be
me
a
this
prophetic,
conviction.
yeah.
The way that you would say it would probably be, I don't actually have this. I feel
I'm
like
not an
God's
expert.
asking me
Not
to bring
expert,
this.
yeah.
You
I'm
would
offering
couch it.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a difference between, I think, speaking from inexperience humbly and building an empire
Yes.
Yeah.
on
Well said.
inexperience
Yeah.
and then demanding obedience from others
First
and
time.
money.
Sorry. No, it's first
And
time
money.
obedience.
Yeah.
First time obedience.
First time.
Yeah, that's
And
first time
money.
obedience. Yeah.
It's just it's different to me. I think
Sure.
I
Okay.
think you
Yeah.
can speak
Okay.
from an
That's well
experience. I don't
said.
think
That's
you
well
can
said.
build an empire.
Yeah.
But your point there on the humility and the posture is everything.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Well, yeah, because can a single pastor preach and lead people who are married in their
Yes.
congregation?
Of course.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Can
Yes.
a married pastor preach and lead people who are single?
course.
Yes, they can. Can a man lead women? Yes. Can a woman lead men?
Yes.
Let's move
Yes.
moving right along.
Yes.
Okay, Institute of Basic Life Principles taught a number of things. Were any of them good? Like, did you watch it and go like, actually, you know what? Like, that's good.
I would really like that first time obedience thing from my kids.
It was hard. I was so wrapped up in the, especially when the episode started to kind of lay out some of the things that were happening behind the scenes that weren't healthy. That I ended up watching, episodes pretty much 2 through 4 with that lens. It was just deep empathy and compassion.
Okay.
And so it was hard for me to say, that's good, because every time I
Right.
saw my man on the screen, I'm just like, ugh.
Yeah.
So it was hard for me to find
I
something
had
good
that
in it.
reaction too. I don't know if I'm answering your question directly, but I think it plays into this.
Okay.
Because I had a hard time saying that I don't know that I saw specifics that I thought were being played out well.
Okay.
But the thing that struck me was this emerged in a moment where the world felt like it was shifting for a bunch of people, and what this thing did or proposed to do. I don't
Okay.
think it did.
Yeah.
What it kind of set itself up to be was,
Yeah.
hey, in the midst of the swirl,
Yeah.
here's some safety. Now, that appears good, and I think there's a way to do that well. I think it didn't do that well, but I could see why people leaned into it.
Why they
And
were drawn
it's
to
not
it.
your exact question, but because I had a hard time seeing the application of any of the things as good personally, but I thought there could have been something good, but it turned another way.
Could I make a confession?
Yeah.
So I actually went to a night and a day of the Institute.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a church in Tacoma, Washington. Never heard of it, but now as I look back, I can think of 2 or 3 families that were large, homeschooled, and if you think about it, I think they were teaching through their curriculum.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have been able to name any of it. Okay. Then I went off to college, didn't hear about it. Then I took a job in North Idaho, which I think that could be like.
It's probably a
there's
hot spot. Probably a hot
there
spot.
probably are some hot spots.
Yeah.
Someone paid for me to go to the Basic Life Conference, I think it was called.
Okay.
And so I went there for a night, and there was something that happened in my life where I realized that I had a lot of tension in my relationship with my parents because they were not for me marrying Carrie.
Oh, wow.
And I remember thinking, like, what's wrong with, so I think I tried to coach up Carrie on how to connect with my family. And so imagine how that went. And I'm there on that night, and I realized this has nothing to do with Carrie. This has to do with me. And I had probably just a lack of gratitude for the things that my parents did to sacrifice for me. So I actually drove from that, knocked on their door in the middle of the night, and asked them to forgive me.
Wow.
And it broke open our relationship and started a healthy relationship, which of course now, obviously Carrie and my dad's passed, but
Sure.
Carrie and my mom go to musicals every year. And
Yeah.
it's so good.
Yeah.
But so there was something to that there that struck, and then there was something in a teaching of digging down underneath some of the problems of your life to some attitudes that were helpful. I think for me, there was a lot of stuff I heard that I was just like, I know I'm not going to do that. That's stupid.
Yeah. You're
So-
filtering. Yeah.
I was filtering quite a bit. When I got back home from the conference, that's when they kind of did the follow-up work. And I didn't adopt into the follow-up program, but I noticed that there were some helpful things that went with me. There also is probably some unhealthy things that went with me too that played out in a little bit of my ministry in the area of probably control and not wanting to be controlling, but there's power dynamics, right?
Yeah, for sure.
God-given
And authority.
authority
Yeah,
structures.
God
Yeah.
given authority. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's umbrellas.
Wow. That image.
Well, so
it makes me sweaty.
Yeah.
yeah, and obviously, so I have probably come from this different perspective of a healing of a relationship.
Yeah.
But then I've also now seen harm.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like what do you do if you have a good experience that for other people became horrible, and it kind of ruins everything that you just had.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
That's a
have
hard
empathy for
space.
you.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with it, but let's go on,
Good
okay?
stuff.
Let me ask something different, okay? Okay. This one, I don't know how to say it differently, so give me some grace if I say it wrong.
Great.
Okay, so I watched Shiny Happy People. In the episodes, I think I saw 0 black or brown people. It was like, am I wrong on
It
that?
was stark. Yeah.
It was all
stark,
white,
real
yeah.
white.
So why is that? Did I see it right? Did I miss it?
Like even in the crowds.
Even in the
Yes.
crowd, so I saw 1 or 2 in these mass spaces. Which is very interesting.
Ken,
Yeah.
you grew up in the black church.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was the Institute of Basic Life Principles something that was widespread?
Not at all.
In your experience?
Not at all. Never heard of it. Never heard of it, ever. And it's so interesting, too, as I look at the demographics for where this was taking place. Martin Luther King says it's sad that 11 o'clock on Sunday is the most segregated day in America. And unfortunately, here in 2023, that statement still rings true. And so I think you really can depict that picture where that was taking place, the segregation there, and how certain tribes emerged because of the demographic that was present. And so, I think that played into it quite a bit. Yeah.
Why do you think that? Because it's not like there are not black churches in the South.
Sure.
So, and that's really kind of like where this whole
That's a
thing
great question.
starts.
Yeah.
Like,
Go here.
Why?
Go here.
Why do you think that there wasn't a flocking of black churches, black families into this ideal?
Yeah, it's just the plight of the black church has historically been a place of refuge, a place of empowerment, a place of identity and dignity. And so, Jesus is really at the center. The worship experience, the ethos is really at the center where I can leave and feel empowered to go engage in a world where I might not be seen as equal or even valued. Yeah. And so that consumes, specifically in the South, that consumes so much of the worship experience that other types of teachings and things of that nature that pull away from that don't last long.
So anything that created a power structure would have been just totally foreign.
Yeah, totally foreign. And to say, the black church at its worst, I've seen power structures take place, specifically with how things are ran. I notice, for somebody who's like a pastor who's bivocational, you maybe have a job where it's low significance in the community, but in the church they get elevated to a place of stature. You get called a man of God, a woman of God. You have a seat up in the pulpit that's bigger than the other ones. You have water, everybody else doesn't. So even in the black church, we have to be mindful of those power structures that can take place and do more harm than good. And so God's been doing a lot of shifting to say, wait, let's make this about Jesus, about the people, and so that way some of those other influences don't creep in. Yeah.
The power, we've mentioned a few times the power structures, systems. In the documentary, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a little thread. It wasn't a long snippet, but it talked about, and I know this pushes buttons, right? A documentary is limited in scope. It doesn't look at the full-orbed nature of anything, even your story a moment ago, Wes. But on this particular issue, do you remember that part where they were talking about the structure of this organization and then the homeschool emphasis? And then there was a snippet there about homeschool and then the integration of schools in the South. And there is historical evidence of homeschool stuff arising, and I'm not saying all homeschool stuff, but arising as a pushback, like we don't want to integrate.
Yeah.
And even myself, growing up in the South, not when schools were integrating.
You grew up in the South?
I did.
Is Justin your name, or is it?
Well, I have a lot of names depending on
Is it J
who
Bob?
I'm with. It is not. My kids call me Heavy J, but that's a different story. But nonetheless,
Heavy J.
No,
Is it really Heavy J?
we're not going.
Can I call you that?
No, you can't.
No. Only my
no,
children.
no.
My quiver is full. There's not more room. Okay, so
He's kind of big. You wouldn't fit.
that's
Can
true.
we moving right along?
I don't know what to do now. Okay, no, but back to this. I think of growing up where I did in Memphis.
Yeah.
Ken, we've talked a lot about this. I mean, the very city in which Dr. King is assassinated.
Yeah.
I grew up in schools that had been integrated years before, but the struggle is still there. Mm-hmm. The division is still there. And so watching this documentary, and it has that little snippet of this was one way that some people pushed back against something more whole, something more diverse, something more inclusive. So I think that plays into it too,
It
doesn't
does,
it?
yeah. And then homeschooling in the African American community, I've never really saw that as a thing where, African American families homeschool. And it probably has implications back to our early days as a nation. The educational pieces weren't there.
Right.
So the typical black family may not have been educated enough to even feel equipped, back to your word, to provide that homeschool environment. So, hey, go off and get an education, make us proud. A lot of my mom's friends or first-gen college. My mom's a first-gen college graduate. So that's just interesting how that all plays into it. So even with the homeschool piece, that might be a part of
And the power dynamic, we've mentioned that now a few times. I think that is such a big thread in all this.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had the race issue. Okay, there also is a strong teaching on gender roles. Okay,
Back
so
to power dynamics.
So yeah, so are there specific biblical gender roles? And one of the follow-up questions is for Jenny, as a female follower of Jesus watching the episodes, what were the moments that made you want to shut it off?
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
What do you guys want to talk about first?
Well, there was that one image where it had God, then man, then woman. I tried to pause it so Kim could see that. She almost broke the TV. So I just
so she could
yeah,
see
yeah.
it.
She didn't want to see.
that's
She
a
wasn't
rough
trying
one.
to turn that crap off.
That's
So.
a rough one. Turn that off. Turn that off. Yeah, I mean that's an interesting one. So the moments that made me want to turn it off are probably like the very firm. This is obviously where women belong in a structure of value. Those moments are hard. Moments where it seemed like there was abuse of power, like when Bill Gothard was bringing young interns and he was saying things about their hair and talking about who they are and saying, don't let this one go. Like anything like that, just kind of like I feel it go up my spine.
Yeah.
So like those
That felt creepy.
That's
That was
really
very
hard.
creepy, yeah.
Very
That's
much.
really hard. Watching Anna Duggar
Yeah.
with her husband.
Okay.
And just the look on her face as like the press is following her from her car to the court.
Yeah.
And like
That was
the
a gut
fact that
punch.
we don't hear her voice.
Yeah, that was hard.
was really hard for me.
Yeah, it was hard.
Because I don't know. Like, does she feel trapped? Does she feel well taken care of? Does she? We don't know, and we don't get to know, and that feels indicative of just the
Yes.
world. Those things are really hard for me. I think there's a way that type of a power structure where it's very clear that there's a male covering that infantilizes women
Yes.
to kind of put them on par with children, which then
Interesting.
then it makes you wonder why then are there more instances of men with younger women or men with brothers with younger sisters. The idea that
Very
women are
interesting.
made to seem they're not going to wear makeup, they're not going to do their hair. They're intended to stay as young looking as possible. Even Michelle Duggar with her really long curly hair, no makeup. There's a way that and it kind of puts them in this like innocent category. But then there's not, as they get older, a clear line, which I think is so very strange probably to be a woman growing up in that. It's like, at what point do I actually become a woman? And there's not a point until you have a baby.
Okay,
And
so
that's
you
really
mentioned
Very
something
interesting.
about brothers and
Very
sisters,
insightful,
and
Jenny.
Josh Duggar obviously
Yeah.
he starts with this inappropriate. What's the right word? They try to use inappropriate. I think we call it sex abuse with his
Yeah.
dog,
Yeah, he
with
abused
his
his sister.
sister.
Touch
Yeah,
it,
he
yeah.
abuses his sisters.
Touch his sister. Okay, and then it moves into
Molestation.
pornography.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, do you think fundamentalism creates a culture where pornography, sex abuse, and a power dynamic abuse thrive? Can you be fundamentalist and not be those things?
I think any power structure that separates men and women in value or voice is just a rampant ground for abuse. And I think that abuse could take whatever form the person who's in power leans toward. I mean, not everybody has the same affinity of sin or temptation.
That's a good
but I
point.
do think that the breeding ground for abuse is just so tied to power. And I actually think, and we can come back to this, but I actually think that's why the biblical view of gender is really important for us to talk about, because I think that Jesus put a different way forward. But I think that my answer to that is I don't know, because I haven't seen a lot of stories that at 10, 20 years down the road of major fundamentalist theology that does not include large stories of abuse. And that doesn't mean that every single person who holds to a fundamentalist theology is an abuser. That's not true, or has been abused. That's
Right.
also not true.
Right.
It would be too sweeping of a statement.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's like fertile ground.
Yeah.
And I think we mentioned it prior to us filming that this is or you might have mentioned, Jane, this is this is spiritual warfare.
It is.
And so the enemy, whether it's a fundamentalist community, any community, our community, we see it. All of us, if we're not careful with our eyes on Jesus, moral failure is knocking at the door. The enemy wants to divide and conquer. So I just think we need to stay on guard.
Well, one of the things we talked about is when we do these podcasts,
Yeah.
it can't just be let's talk about other people's sins.
Yeah.
Right.
How do we talk about our own?
I appreciate that. And I would say
Yeah,
that's
for
what
sure,
even
man.
we've mentioned a few times, and I even mentioned a few times, the power dynamic thing. As I watch this, there's compassion, there's outrage, there's all the normal emotions of being a human. But I literally was brought back into my own life, my own temptations with power. And I think that is at the thread of so much of this. And I think connected to what Jenny said, if I heard you right, when there's a system that names a power structure that puts me in a position of power over another in a way that I don't see Jesus.
And calls it God-given.
And that to me is just like
It's setting you up
destruction's
to
gonna
fail.
happen.
Yeah.
Something bad is going to happen.
I have my own
Yeah.
temptations already. I have my own ego. I
Yeah.
have my own stuff.
Yeah.
Right? It's
Yeah.
going to play on the worst and broken parts of me.
Oh.
And we have to confess that. We
do.
have to.
Yeah.
When you this is really interesting because I probably hold both sides. When we talk about, you said the word moral failure.
Yeah.
So that would be a phrase that a lot of times if there was a person in power and they made usually a mistake on a sexual nature,
Right.
that we would call that a moral failure. A lot of times we're not using that for like somebody drinks too much. Sometimes they are, but I would say most of the time there's some sort of an allegation of sexual misconduct.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that we actually call that a moral failure, especially when there's someone who is in a position where they have been taken advantage of, that we don't call that abuse.
Right.
Yeah. That's
So
good.
and by the way, there are times that it is a consensual choice and
Sure.
both people have made a moral failure.
But you could say when the power dynamic is there, it's still abuse.
It's still abuse.
And so that whole
Yeah.
thing is really interesting that
It's
in
an
the
abuse of
church,
power.
in
Yeah.
the
It's
church,
abuse
we
of power,
call
yeah.
it moral failure. We don't call it abuse. And even that speaks to a power dynamic. But I actually don't think it does men any service because that means now that this whole thing, this is about your moral standard that you failed.
Yeah.
But most of the time, the woman is a non-player in the story.
Right.
So whether she had a part in it or not, whether she was taken advantage of or not, there's no voice. There's
So, yeah,
nothing
that's
there for
interesting.
it.
Even in the failure, the power is still focused in.
Yeah, and it's
the
about
system.
and then what the whole organization, the group of people, their intention is how do we then restore the structure,
Yeah.
restore the seat, whether it's with the same pastor or a new pastor in that role. And I have empathy for it because I live in this world.
Sure.
And I think there's a lot of pressure then on that kind of leadership. And then where is it that that person gets to be a human and has redemption? And then
Yeah.
what's the story for
So that
the women?
Yeah.
I appreciate that deeply, and I think if you brought up the leadership thread, and I would say myself as someone who in this season of my life I'm serving the church in a particular way, so there's servant leadership there, right? I would just say to myself and all of us, we have to do the work on that. Literally, there's a person I got to know and appreciate their work. J.R. Woodward has a really great project out right now looking at Jesus and the powers, which we see all over the New Testament, and how leadership, and are we imitating the powers that Jesus has disarmed, but we see the residue of that all over the place when things are corrupted, when abuse happens, et cetera, et cetera. Are we imitating those powers in our leadership, or are we imitating the way of Jesus?
Ooh.
Yeah.
And back to what you said, Wes, like I'll confess my own. I know my own temptations.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Right? I know my own temptations for my ego to want to rise up. But the good news in Jesus actually compels me, invites me to lay that down, even when it's not easy,
Yeah.
for my own good, for
Yeah.
your good, for the good of the world. right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we have to do that work. So I
Yeah.
think you brought that thread up, and I think that's crucial.
Well, I think any type
Yeah,
of
it's
power
really
can be
good.
abused.
yes.
So even in the position that I sit in, there are times that I'm like, okay,
Very
this
powerful.
isn't like a guy thing or a girl thing.
Sure.
This is like a people
No,
who
it's-
have positions of power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of any kind of power. At some point you have to say, like, how am I going to engage in this? And I think I love that you brought up Jesus, and always do, because there's no other way for us to move forward than to follow him.
Yeah.
And when Jesus talks about authority, he talks about it in a couple ways. One, he talks about having authority over the powers of the world, demons, principalities, that kind of thing. So there's authority there.
Yeah.
But then he says, all authority has been given to me.
Yeah.
And now I give it to you. But he actually directs the authority. And he directs the authority
Okay.
toward mission. So
Right.
go make disciples. He
Yeah.
doesn't say, now go build power
Now
structures.
lord it over
Right.
someone.
Yeah.
He actually says, among you it will be different.
Yes.
Sure.
The leaders of this world lord
Yeah.
it over each
Yeah.
other.
But not so with you. Thank you.
I
for
have
saying
3
that.
questions I want to go with quick fire.
Okay.
So whatever your shortest answer could possibly be. Okay. It seems like, okay, they discussed the Joshua generation. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It seemed like the goal was to train an elite force of Christian young people to take over every area of government to make America a Christian nation. Does Jesus want America to be a Christian nation? What's your short answer on that?
I think Jesus wants Americans to know him and follow him with their lives, and other people of other nations too.
For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, who believes in him will not perish, have everlasting life. That includes America.
Jesus wants every human to find their deepest identity
Yeah.
in him. But Jesus also knew and knows that there is no nation structure that equates to the kingdom of God.
Okay.
Come on. Let's go.
There was an emphasis on serving the mission of God. Where's the line between youth living out Christian service and abusing child labor laws? Was this another form of trafficking?
Yes. Was that short enough?
That was short enough. I can keep moving.
You can
Keep going.
Agree, yeah.
There was abuse.
Are,
Ditto.
are reality TV shows wrecking America? Is it wrong to make money or become famous off your faith?
Reality shows, we can't bear them up. We talked in a previous conversation about fame and what it does to the human soul.
Yeah.
People aren't made to live in a fishbowl.
Yeah.
It destroys us. It also destroys the watcher at times if we compare. And I know that's a complex kind of
Yeah.
reality, but I think it's doing more harm than good. If you were to put a scale out, I think there's evidence it's doing more harm than good. I'll answer that part of the question.
You said, is it wrong to make money off your faith?
Because aren't we?
I just think, specifically as we think about opportunities and coaching and book writing and equipping the church and being compensated for that, I think it's the intention behind it. If I'm doing it for me to become famous, I think that's the dark side. But if God is getting the glory, and whatever income or money that is being attained goes right back into the mission, I think that's God honoring. Yeah.
Are we not going to answer the question about gender roles? Is that not what we're going to do?
Which one?
Are there biblical gender roles? We didn't answer that question.
We didn't answer
we
it.
did
I just think if I was watching this right
Yeah.
now and we didn't answer that question,
Okay.
I'd be like, they didn't answer that question on purpose.
Okay,
That's
okay,
what I
hang
think
on,
would
hang on.
happen.
Let's come back to that. Let's
I
come
think
back
we
to
have
that.
to come back to
That's
that.
okay,
I'm sorry.
okay.
I'm sorry.
No,
I just,
bring it
Well,
back.
I was hoping you would bring it up.
I need us to come back to
Okay,
it.
right. So
Okay.
you have
We do
on
need
one
to.
side, what would it be? Like, one side would be complementarian, right? There are specific roles that complement. And then on the other side would be egalitarian, which is maybe that there's gifts, that the gifts are actually more than the gender role, actually kind of show how we complement. So what do you think? Are there specifically biblical gender roles?
I would say
I
to answer,
can't
I
wait,
want to
yeah.
answer it. My quick answer would be no. My clarifying thing would say, what do we mean by gender roles?
Well, what
So-
do you mean by gender roles when you
So
say no?
specifically, I'm leaning into the place of some of the classic questions. So I'll use my home as an example. My wife Hannah and I, we've been married 27 years. I remember being taught early on as I started following Jesus that look, you got to be the leader of the home, and when you guys come to a disagreement, you're going to be the one to solve the issue. I can honestly tell you, in our 27 years together, we have made all of our decisions together. We have never hit a moment of impasse where I had to say, look, I'm the leader now and you're not, if I'm being really transparent. My wife is one of the most gifted leaders I know.
Yeah.
I don't feel threatened by that.
Yeah.
I'm not less of a masculine person because of that. She would tell you that.
Yeah.
So I'm just speaking clearly in our home. Are there things she can do as a mom that are unique to her, both maybe as a mom and as Hannah? Sure. But are there things that I can do as a dad? My point is, I grew up in a context where often I would hear gender roles reduced to like who does the cooking, cleaning. I don't have much time for that, to be honest.
Chef. Yeah.
I cook, I do laundry.
Yeah.
She does. We raise our kids. Does that make sense? So in one way, I think that can get kind of swirly pretty quick.
Yeah.
I think in the church, the scriptures are full of this beautiful, beautiful vision of a whole humanity where your sons and daughters prophesy. Yeah. Jesus seems to think that a woman would be a great one to preach the first Easter sermon.
There it is.
And go proclaim. So I'm just saying sometimes it gets reduced, and that's where I push back on what we mean by gender roles. My little example of home, I don't know if that was helpful or not.
Yeah.
That's where I sit.
Yeah. I like to use sports analogies. Basketball is one of my favorite sports. And I mean, you have all these different positions that are all in the same team, and you need all of those positions to move forward. And that's, as I look at my own marriage, and I grew up, with the same philosophy. You're the head, husbands love your wives as Christ loved the church. Wives submit your husband. Those scriptures get, kind of get, overused in the wrong context.
Yeah.
What I've learned that when I'm creating the best version of myself every day, mind, body, soul, there's a part of Kim that she submits to me and says, we're in this thing together. So from a marriage perspective, Kim is not somebody who's added on to me. She actually completes me. So for me, I'm incomplete without Kim. That's why we become one. So that's how I kind of view marriage as unity of one. And then far as like the church, again, I'm biased. I have 3 daughters. And somebody asked me the other day, what do I think about, the women in ministry? And I said, it would just break my heart for my daughters to think that whatever Jesus put on their heart to lead, love, and serve has a lid because of their gender. And so that's kind of where I sit. Yeah, I think, God is no respecter of person. So
I think when God created humanity, he created male and female.
Yes.
And
He
I
created
love
them.
that God created in diversity,
Yeah.
but also in balance. That there's something about, I do think that men and women are different, as evidenced by many things.
yeah.
But even in my own marriage, my husband and I have very different giftings.
Yeah.
He's not loud. I am loud. And so when we talk about even
You
just
can
the
push
way
the
that
mic
we
back a little bit,
engage in the world, we show up in a room differently, and we also show up for
Yeah.
each other differently.
Yeah.
It's interesting when we think about like a biblical gender role, because Jesus talks about gender when he says, like, a man shall leave his wife. He actually quotes that Genesis passage, right? And then you referenced Acts chapter 2 and the day of Pentecost, where there's this remembering of a prophecy that your sons and daughters will prophesy.
Yeah.
So Jesus comes, and have you ever heard Jesus called a curse breaker? Like he broke the curse of sin, that idea. And in Genesis chapter 3, there's this curse, and the curse is that the snake's going to be on the ground, and the man's going to toil,
Right.
and the woman's going to have pain in childbirth.
Right.
But then also it says this, that the woman's going to want to lead over the man, and the man's going to lead over the woman. And a lot of times, by the way, that's actually where some of Bill Gothard's stuff comes from.
From that passage.
Yes, and the idea there that I find so intriguing is that we would build a whole system of functioning off of the curse of sin.
Yeah.
So
Right.
both
That's
the whole power struggle between men and women
Right.
is the curse,
Yeah.
not just the woman wanting to lead the man.
Yeah.
Both of them are like that. None of that was said before that moment of the curse. And so, as people who believe in the resurrection power of
Yes.
Jesus,
Come
as
on.
people
Yes.
who believe in the new creation, I just find it odd
Yes.
that we would try to build a system
Based on the
curse
Yes.
that
really
Jesus
good.
broke,
Yes.
that the Spirit then empowered us to live beyond.
Come on.
I
that's
love
good.
that.
That's
And
really
even
good,
Ken,
Jenny.
you quoted actually a beautiful text that gets so mangled about how in a marital relationship, back to your notion of the resurrection and the age of the Spirit, the line right before that always gets left out. Before you get to wives do this and husbands do this, the line right before it is submit to one another out of reverence for Christ.
Come on.
I-
That's
To
it.
all of us. And that is a vision
Yeah.
of the new creation.
I
That is
also
a vision of the resurrection.
I genuinely
Yeah.
love the passage that you brought up in Ephesians
Yeah.
because I actually think that both the husband and the wife, which by the way, it does not say the man and the woman, it says the husband and the wife,
Yeah.
but that both the husband and the wife are asked to lay down the very thing that the curse said they would fight for.
That's right.
And
That's
so
right.
I think that our act of like submission to Christ
Yes.
actually looks like I'm not going to fight for the thing that sin would lead me to fight for. And therefore, in laying myself down the way Jesus did, I'll experience the power of the Spirit so that
That's
the type
right.
of relationship that we have will look a lot more like heaven.
That's
Because
right.
like when I think about heaven, like
Snap,
is
man.
there umbrellas in heaven? Like are we
Yeah.
sitting under different are men over women? Are women subservient to men in heaven? I've never heard one person
it's-
say that yes to that answer.
It's always mutuality.
So then my question is, do we or do we not follow Jesus' mandate to bring what is of heaven here?
Right.
We were supposed to pray it.
Yeah.
May the kingdom come.
Will be done.
So I think we answered it, didn't we?
We just have thoughts.
Okay, all right.
Just have thoughts.
Hey, so obviously this is the end of our podcast. We will jump into another subject next time. But shiny, happy people who watched it, you answered some great questions here. Is there like something that you didn't say that if someone watched it, that you would want to say to them before we leave here today?
Yeah. I have a thought, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
I was, we texted this to each other. It gut punched me to watch the various stories of the folks who were on. And I would say to anyone who maybe has gone through a season where the power structures have been put upon them and has deflated them, harmed them, hurt them in the name of God, I would say not in a placating way, but like like you see it in Scripture where we're called to actually repent. And I would say, I'm sorry that happened to you.
Yeah.
And even in the name of others who would bear the name of Christ, I would repent for that.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that moved me deeply watching that. And I ached with that.
Yeah.
So,
I probably picture my daughter Jane, and I was her age when I started trying to figure out who I was in the world. And I just wish that someone had looked at me and said, you are intrinsically valuable because the image of God is on you. Yeah. And that you actually aren't existing to to be a prize for somebody. And God isn't judging you based on how you show up for a future husband. He actually just really delights in you.
yes.
And so I hope that, people who maybe have heard a story that says that they're only worth something if they have a certain story or if they have a certain way they present themselves in the world, that you would just know that God deeply loves you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ditto. I couldn't say it any better. I would say one of the things I've noticed that was helpful for me in watching it was, one, giving myself space for self-care afterwards. There were some emotions that came up, and I found myself, if it's a moment of prayer, go for a walk, go to the gym. So give yourself space for that. And if you can, try not to watch it by yourself. Watch it with somebody that you love and trust, that knows you, and you can have safe dialogue as you process some of the things that you might hear or see.
That's good.
It was hard for me to watch. And I'll tell you, I shared this with Jenny yesterday, I'm white.
Yeah.
I'm about the age that all of these stories end up being about, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
And I'm in a position.
Yeah.
So I'm just it is probably this constant of have mercy upon me, a sinner. I mean, it's it scares
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you,
The
brother.
crap out of you?
language I don't use. It scares.
Yeah, I hear you.
It frightens me.
I hear you.
Because the pull towards power or control or ego or I feel the pull.
Yeah.
I feel it.
And it's not even, it can come externally.
Yeah.
You know, I know we're almost done. I was listening to either a podcast or I read an article about, when there is abuse or more affairs that happen, and some of the statistics with these pastors that were interviewed, it happened Monday morning, Monday evening. So they get all of these accolades and this adrenaline rush on Sunday, and then back to normal life on Monday, and then they go, that pull is too strong.
As you were talking about that, even just the external pull,
Yeah.
people want to be led. So part of it is these people are flocking to a place. And it just made me think about Jesus weeping over Jerusalem when he
Yeah.
said that they're like people without a shepherd, like sheep
Yeah.
without a shepherd. And I think that the danger is when we say, so I'm going to go ahead and be that shepherd for the people instead of pointing them to the good shepherd.
You got to point them to the ship.
Yeah, we're
Jesus is
all under that
already
leadership.
Jesus is already weeping over our world, our
Yes.
culture, and he's like, they need a shepherd, and we need to point them to Jesus.
Well, this has been 2 o'clock coffee, talking theology and cultural issues with some of my dear friends. Love you guys.
Love you too, man. Appreciate it.